I'm a bread baker. I've been baking bread for more than 40 years. And it all started with my first trip to Europe. It was in 1982, and I went to Italy with my father. I remember we landed in Rome on a Sunday morning, checked into our hotel, promptly went down to breakfast, and we were presented with a basket of bread that looked a little bit like this. These are what are called Rosetta rolls. These are, like a lot of the food in Italy, regional to the Lazio region, which is where Rome is located. What makes it unique and distinct beyond its rose shape to this particular bread is that when you slice through the middle of the bread, it's actually hollow on the inside. And I remember the first time that I saw this bread, and I asked myself the question, how do they do it? How do they get the bread so that there's no bread in the inside of that roll? So when I went back home, I searched across bakeries all over the country, and I couldn't find anything quite like it. And that's when I started my journey to learn how to bake bread. Flash forward 30 years. I am the global IT director at PPG, working with several of the businesses there. And part of my responsibility was to submit PPG for 2 industry recognitions. The CIO 100 Award. This is for IT innovation and the business value that it brings. The other one is Computerworld's 100 Best Places to Work in IT. Now, I will tell you that PPG was fortunate enough to receive both of these recognitions, but I can tell you from personal experience that just because you receive it one year, there's absolutely no guarantee that you'll ever get it again. These are phenomenally difficult, highly coveted, highly competitive industry recognitions. But I look back at one point in time at about a decade's worth of winners of both of these. And I noticed there were certain firms that kept showing up on the list for one, the other, and in several cases, both of these industry recognitions. And once again, I asked myself the question, how do they do it? How do they get this kind of recognition? What is it about their firms and what they do and how they practice what they do that gets them this kind of regular recognition? And so about 18 months ago, I began researching the practices of these companies by talking to their leaders and getting their stories. And that's what I'm going to share with you today. But what I found out more so than any of these recognitions, the industry recognitions and the awards, that's not what they're about. In fact, what they were about is having an impact in their role. It wasn't about their title or their position. It was about having an impact in 3 key areas. First area is impacting the firm that pays them. We're all paid to have an impact. But what these leaders, through the series of interviews that I conducted, they clearly had viewed their role as to have an impact by driving innovation of processes, products, and services. The residual impact of that was the CIO 100 Award. Now, what they knew was, in order to do that in a sustainable fashion, on a regular basis, they needed to have an impact on the people that they work with. They need to understand both their personal and professional motivation of the people that they work with, who were on their teams. They also needed to be able to connect them to the broader purpose of their firm. And as a result, many of those firms received the best places to work in IT. And then the third leg of this is that they understood that to have a highly engaged, highly resilient organization that's going to continuously drive innovation, they needed to have access to a talent pool. And that talent pool required them to have an impact on the profession. They needed to be helping to drive a deeper talent pool and a more diverse talent pool. These leaders understand that more diverse teams are more innovative. I think we all know that. The research tells us that. The other reality that we know, and these leaders know, is the technology profession is not the most diverse. They see that they have a personal responsibility to help drive and improve the diversity and the depth of talent. So these 3 are all interdependent, and they see this as the key reason, the key purpose for their role. So today we're going to focus, obviously, on impacting the firm through innovation, given our theme. And I'll speak to some of the very specific examples about what they were doing to drive innovation. But before I do that, this is a small group of leaders who received this recognition. Do all technology leaders care about innovation? Do they really care? Do they think that's really important in what they do? And the way I learned the answer to that question is from an annual survey that Foundry conducts. It's called the State of the CIO Survey. Foundry is the parent company for CIO.com, for Computerworld, a number of other publications. And they ask a whole series of questions trying to gauge the direction that a lot of organizations are headed. How much money you're going to spend? You're going to spend more or less in the coming year? What technologies are important to you? What projects are really key to you? But this I thought was an interesting question. They asked more than 1,000 leaders who participated in the survey. Where do you spend most of your time as a leader? And they gave them 3 options. The first one is, are you a functional leader? Are you spending most of your time with your own group? Are you inwardly focused on the IT function? The second area is, are you a transformational leader? Are you helping your peers and the rest of the organization to drive transformation in your particular firm? Is that where you're spending most of your time? And the third area is, are you a business strategist? Are you leading the way for your firm, for the future direction of your firm, and are you driving innovation in your particular role? So here are the responses over the last 5 years, pretty consistent. And so the far right-hand side is the most recent survey. 45% of those leaders that responded are focused on transformational initiatives. About a third are those business strategists are focused on strategy and innovation. And 23% are more inwardly focused on their particular function. That's where they spend most of their time. But here's the interesting question that they asked that I thought was pertinent to this. Where do you want to be in 3 to 5 years? And their responses were pretty consistent. More than 50% want to be the business strategist. They see the value that IT can bring in driving innovation for their respective firms. In fact, if you look at that number, that question for the last 5 years, it's consistently 20% higher than the current state of those focused on business strategy. Bottom line is, we're not making progress there, okay? But the aspiration is to be the business strategist for these particular leaders. These are the results from the last survey. I asked more than 50 of the leaders of CIO 100 award-winning organizations the very same question, thinking I knew what the answer was going to be, right? They're known for innovation. They're probably in that last category, but surprisingly not. About the same percentage are focused as business strategists. But what's most important is what they're not doing. They are not inwardly focused. 60% of them are really focused on those transformational initiatives, and that's where the opportunities to drive innovation exist for those leaders. So you don't have to be in that last category to be driving innovation. In fact, I think a lot of them are seeing it in the transformational role, okay? So, tech leaders want to drive innovation. What about the people that they lead, right? Are they on board with it? Well, I can tell you from personal experience, I had this conversation a lot early on in my career. Chris, I know you want us to be more innovative, but IT people, we're left brain. We're analytical, we're logical, we're problem solvers. People, and it usually was, people like you, Chris, are right brained. Although I was an IT person, so I didn't quite make that connection. To be right-brained, you're creative, you're imaginative, you're artistic, and that's not who we are as IT people. Now, I struggled with that until I read the book, The Innovator's DNA. How many of you have read it or are familiar or have heard of this book? Perfect, because I'm going to now tell you all about it. So, The Innovator's DNA was written by Jeff Dyer, Hal Gergerson, and the late Clayton Christensen. Anything you want to know about innovation theory comes, anything that Clayton has written is what you want to read. He is the foremost thinker in that particular space. But the beauty of this book, for me, to answer the previous slide, was that we can all be innovators. It's not a genetic predisposition. to be innovative. In fact, it can be practiced and learned. So they determined this after doing about 8 years of interviews with some of the most recognized and some lesser recognized innovators of firms. Folks like Jeff Bezos, like Michael Dell, and even Mark Benioff from Salesforce.com. And what they learned was that these leaders, to find the next big idea for their respective firm, they practice 5 key behaviors, what they call the 5 discovery skills. The first one is experimenting. I think we all associate innovation with experimenting. This isn't big E experimenting. These are small, low-cost, quick prototypes. Think of it that way. The next discovery skill was questioning. This is hard for some of us. This is where you ask really hard, provocative questions challenging the status quo. It's not what some of us are really good at, but the ones that really are good at this can find out the opportunities to innovate. The third one, my favorite one, is observing. That's where you have to get up out of your chair, get out of your office, get out of your house, and go to see where the customer is, where your client is, to understand what job they're trying to get done and the struggle they're having in getting it done. You can't do that sitting at home. You can't observe very well, at least, what they're really struggling with. The fourth one is networking, not social networking, but networking for ideas in places and with people that you wouldn't normally associate with. And then the last one is associating. This is where you really take a lot of the data from the first 4 and derive new ideas based on getting that data and seeing analogous solutions in totally different industries and maybe different geographies that help you solve your problem. What I learned through the course of these interviews, these leaders I interviewed were all practicing these. And so I'm going to use this as a framework to show you some of the practices of these award-winning organizations. We're going to start with experimenting. And this example comes from Lexmark. Lexmark, many of you know, is a leader in print and imaging technologies. They have received the CIO 100 award the last 4 years running. And in my conversation with Vishal Gupta, their CIO and CTO, it's really clear that innovation is just a part of their culture. And it's not isolated to their product development group. Everybody is involved in the company, whether you're in IT, HR, finance, they engage everybody in the process. The example that Vishal gave me that I thought really related to experimenting is something that they call focus to future, or F to F. On the surface, this sounds like a hackathon, but it's so much more for them. They have played with this idea over several years, made multiple modifications, but they use this as a part of their product development cycle. So they conduct 2 of these a year across 3 global locations. What they do is they bring together teams of 2 employees. The one rule is those 2 employees cannot work together on a daily basis. They want different perspectives because they know they'll get better ideas from 2 people that are not used to working together. The teams, they view this as an opportunity to help them to learn how to collaborate as well as communicate. So all the teams have to create a video based on their prototype. They put it through a Shark Tank-like scenario. And then the winning team gets $50,000 to develop it further. And again, they do this 2 times a year across 3 locations. So they are really committed to this idea. They use the ideas for both internal operational improvements, but also improvements to their products, okay? And one of the examples that Vishal pointed out, which I thought was a great way to look at something, is he said, you know, we have customers in the healthcare industry and in education, and they may have a student or a patient who has to get documentation before they leave. So a student maybe gets homework assignment, but their parents or their guardians speak a different language, all right? Or in the case of healthcare, you may get some instructions about your medicine, and you have a care giver, right, who has to be able to read those instructions. They may speak an entirely different language. And so the question is, instead of just printing the documents, why can't you just translate them during the printing process? And so out of these F2F sessions, they came up with the following solution to address that problem. It's a feature to one of their printers that they just released last year called the Translation Assistant.
Now we're going to translate a typical document that a teacher would send home in a backpack. In this particular case, they may have 4 students in their class that speak Spanish, so they'll make multiple copies of the same document. I'm going to choose whether I want to email it or print it. I want to print. Then choose the number of copies, and it will start scanning the document. Now, this is going to take 20 to 30 seconds, depending on the complexity of the document and the language that the user chose. This is not a simple process. This is going up to the cloud, deconstructing the document, translating the document, and then putting it all back together again. At that point, it will tell you that the translation is complete, and it will print out. Right now, it is downloading the translated document, and we will see it print. Here is the document that the teacher could put in the backpack, translated into Spanish, so that it can go home and the parents will understand what's going on in school.
So again, this is a result of one of these Focus to Future sessions. And this product actually translates to and from a couple dozen languages, not just Spanish and English. So what I think is brilliant about this particular example from Visual is that they had to connect their employees to the plight and the challenge and the struggle that those customers in healthcare and education have to deal with. And that's how they came up with this particular solution. So moving on, we're going to go to questioning. This is the one where you have to ask really hard, provocative questions. This is one I've had to personally work a lot on to try to get better at. This comes from a CIO of a Fortune 100 manufacturer and service provider. They received 3 CIO 100 awards over time. And the story that she shared with me is one of a problem that the senior management of this particular company was struggling with. And they, quite frankly, didn't have an idea of how to solve it. So what she decided to do was she was going to explore this particular business problem with her team. And so she put together what she calls a strategy session. And it was 90 minutes. She bought them pizza for lunch. She sat them down and said, okay, I'm going to share with you a problem that we're struggling with. And I want you to think about it. And you, for the next 90 minutes, you can only do one thing. You can only ask questions. No solutions. Anybody in a meeting with an IT person who can not provide a solution for 90 minutes? It's a challenge. And she said this was really hard for them. But they did. They, as she described it, peeled back the onion. They went, a lot of why questions. Why did this problem happen? How long has it been going on for? What did we try to do differently, right? Lots of questions so you can begin to understand what's really going on and to be able to understand the problem. Now remember, these are all IT people trying to tackle a problem that they wouldn't normally get involved in. And at the end of the 90 minutes, she said, okay, we're going to get together again in a couple of weeks, but in the meantime, you have an assignment. And your assignment is that you are going to pretend to be somebody who wants to put our company out of business. You're sitting in a garage someplace, and your goal in life is to put us out of business, and you know this information about us. You know about this problem. What would you do? And so when she got them back together for another 90 minutes, she described their enthusiasm was almost like childlike wonder. They had no boundaries. They were able to come up with whatever idea, the crazier the better, as she said. And what they did is they identified 3 really great ideas. And what she then did was something that next, I think, kind of blew them away. She said, okay, it's up to you. I'm stepping away from this. You have to decide whether or not you're going to take this forward. If you want to, generate some proposals, and my commitment to you is I'm going to take that to senior leadership. If you drop it right now, this is just an interesting exercise, right? So what it resulted was leaders appeared out of that group. The risk takers who are willing to step forward and claim the idea and develop the idea. 2 of those 3 ideas were green lighted. And what she said was interesting, more so than anything else, this raised the stature of the IT team to not being the order takers, right? This allowed them to be viewed by senior leaders as people who were proactively involved in helping solving problems that nobody else knew how to solve. So that's questioning. The next skill, observing, one of my favorite ones. This one comes from King County, Washington. This is the county where Seattle is based. And it comes from Tanya Hanna, who's their CIO. You can see they've received the CIO 100 award 6 times. And this is based on a real problem that they had with a waste treatment plant that had a release into the Puget Sound. And they wanted to understand what caused that problem. They had an audit, and they knew that training was a problem. And observing, as you remember, this is the one you have to get up and get out of your chair, you have to go see things. And what they observed was that there were 2 sets of workers there. There were the highly experienced, read that to mean mature employees who they know exactly what to do when there's a crisis. Then there were younger, newer employees that had to learn how to operate this highly complex facility. And what they were given were binders full of paper, right? So in the middle of a crisis, as you'll hear Tanya say, you're not going to pull out a binder, okay? But it required them to see the employees, to see the plant, to understand what the real challenge was. And her other observation was, the younger workers, that's the way they learn is like a lot of us learn now is we go to YouTube, right? We pull up a video and that's how we learn, right? We don't pull out a binder, we don't read a manual. We learn using technology. And that's where they came up with an augmented reality solution for that. And I'll let this video give you an idea of the solution they came up with that was a CIO 100 award-winning idea.
How do we think about leveraging technology to solve real-world problems? When you're in the middle of a crisis, you're not going to go pull out a binder and try to flip to a page. In early 2017, the West Point treatment plant discharged sewage into the Puget Sound. As a result of the audit findings, training was a potential issue for the staff here. One of the biggest challenges for a new employee coming in is this facility is daunting. And you're looking at green lights, red lights, blinking lights, and someone says, here's a manual and you have to figure it out. The HoloLens presented this opportunity where we could capture the tribal knowledge of our most experienced staff and help them train new employees.
Manifest is something that can be used across multiple devices, so if their hands need to be free to work on equipment, then maybe it's better to be wearing goggles so they can use both their hands.
Cross-device functionality is huge. Having that cross-functionality with existing plant systems that are monitoring the maintenance and operation adds a tremendous amount of leverage.
We came up with some new things, and one of those was around the Internet of Things, so IoT, and how the data that we're already collecting in this plant can help us work more effectively and become not just a smart city, but a smart county, where we're doing a lot more with that data. We're just starting off in the wastewater area, but I think there's a lot of ways to use augmented reality and manifest software throughout King County. I'm totally excited about the future. I mean, I think what this is helping us do is change culture in King County, and it can really have a huge impact on our ability to deliver services to customers more effectively.
King County is about creating opportunities and delivering outcomes for members of the community.
It's a virtual world, and if you haven't experienced it before, it's a new way of thinking. Get into it.
What I really appreciated about this video is it's back to this idea of observing just how physical that work was. And the whole idea of having a problem, releasing sewage into the Puget Sound and knowing what to do and pulling out a manual versus having the HoloLens, I think makes a huge difference in how they approach this particular problem. Wouldn't normally think to ask. This example comes from Jim Rinaldi, who was the CIO for NASA's Jet Propulsion Lab. As you can see at the top of that page, they are the perennial winners of the CIO 100 award. They're also perennial recipients of the Places to Work in IT award. I don't think there's any coincidence after having a conversation with Jim just how engaged his particular organization is. Now you think about JPL, what they do is they fly unmanned missions into outer space, places like Mars, right? The Mars rover is probably the one that many of us can remember and think of. So where does JPL go to find the next new technology? What I thought was a highly unconventional place, which was the Consumer Electronics Show. So Jim takes his team there every year, and they go trend spotting. They look for the next big thing. And he talked about 3D printing, and then one year they went there and they had a table with 3D printing on them, printing trinkets and little small things. Then the next year they had a room dedicated to 3D printing, and the following year they had an entire hall dedicated to 3D printing. And so what Jim did is he didn't wait for the engineers to ask him for 3D printers. He went out and bought them and dropped them into the engineering departments. And they used those to prototype the next generation robotic arms and components for the next generation of rovers, the cost of which would have been multiple times greater with the kind of machinery that would be required to generate what they would do in the past. So a great example, I think, of looking for answers in different places than you would normally think you would go to, right? So so this is one, I think, that plays to that perfectly. The last one is associating, and this is going to be a personal example from PPG. One of the things that they talk about in the book around networking is, a great place to go network is conferences. Conferences like TED conferences, because there's lots of people with lots of different ideas. It's a great way to learn. And I'll give you an example of how we applied that there. This is a great example, right? Who would have thought this morning we would have learned something about bias in the nuclear industry and how that might apply to an entirely different business, right? But I think there's a lot to learn when you come to these kinds of events. But discovery is when you take all the input from all those other discovery skills, associating is where you take the other input and you come up with something that's analogous to that problem. So we had a problem where we were trying to figure out how to help consumers buy paint online. The biggest problem with that is picking a color. It's just that simple. That's the holy grail. If you can help consumers decide what color they want digitally, you can crack the code. And I would tell you this is still a problem in this industry, so there's opportunities there. And the real problem is you have to pick from more than 1,000 colors, typically, right? It's not an easy process to go through. So as I mentioned, networking for ideas, some people may go to a TED conference. If you can't go to a TED conference, next best thing would be a TED Talk. And so we actually watched a TED Talk that was given by Gary Flake from Microsoft's Live Labs, and talking about a tool that they had under development called Pivot. And I'll let you watch this video.
What we have right here is the cover of every single Sports Illustrated ever produced. It's all here, it's all on the web. You can go back to your rooms and try this after my talk. With Pivot, you can drill into a decade. You can drill into a particular year. You can jump right into a specific issue. So I'm looking at this, I see the athletes that have appeared in this issue, the sports. I'm a Lance Armstrong fan. So
if you saw it, you would know what I was talking about. So for some reason, the video didn't play. But Pivot allows you to take a lot of information visually and to navigate across it, okay? And this happens to be a screenshot of what it looks like. Every single one of those squares happens to be a Sports Illustrated cover. And you can slice and dice and zoom in and zoom out of every single one of those issues by selecting data here or using your mouse, okay? And so any guess when we saw this what we associate it with in the paint industry? Anybody want to shout out? Yes. The walls painted Home Depot? That one, yes. Well, this one happened to be at Lowe's. So thank you. So that was the association. So hopefully that's a really good way to think about associating, is each one of those colors that, and I'm out of the business, but I still carry these around with me all the time. Because you never know when you need a pink. Our granddaughter, that's her favorite color. Anyway, so that we saw immediately. Our challenge was we didn't have data for every single one of those colors, other than the name of the color, right? So we had to collect a lot of data. We'll see if this video works. So this is how we took our data, put it into the Pivot tool, and with a lot of data collection behind the scenes, and created this tool that allows you to zoom in, see each color individually, and you can see on the far right-hand side, there's data for every one. You can also buy a sample, you can visualize that color. You can then zoom out. You can say, I just want to see colors by the color family, right? So in this case, I want to see all the yellows, the blues, or the greens, and then zoom in on the greens. And then a new idea that we came up with was color popularity. Now, this is not popularity as customers vote on it. These are actual gallons sold out the door at Lowe's. Real popularity. So we built this for Lowe's. This was a part of a suite of tools that we developed that won the CIO 100 award in 2011. Lowe's liked it so much that they embedded it in their website. We had to include our competitors' colors in there as well. But the value that it brought, not only to PPG, but to Lowe's, was huge. It helped them to drive paint sample sales online and begin this whole journey of finding the right color for your painting project. Okay? So those are the 5 discovery skills, but beyond that, I would tell you these leaders that I interviewed, there are several attributes that they have that you've got to have beyond being able to practice those skills. First of all, you have to be willing to be vulnerable to be an innovator. You have to be willing to admit that you don't have all the answers if you're questioning, if you're experimenting, networking for ideas, and so on. We all know leaders who don't want to necessarily sign up for that, right? But you've got to be able to do that. You've got to encourage your teams to be able to do that as well. You also have to be empathetic. You know, to understand your customer's struggle, you really have to care about it, right? So that you really want to help them. And that's clearly an attribute that these leaders demonstrate. They're really good at connecting their teams to the bigger purpose of their firm and making them feel as if they're part of something bigger than themselves. That's clearly an attribute that these leaders demonstrate. And then last but not least, they're willing to have the courage to do the next right thing. You know, you can have all the great ideas, as in the case of the questioning example. That CIO could have just decided not to bring those ideas forward from her team, because maybe those wouldn't have been received very well by senior leadership. You have to have a level of courage to actually practice innovation as a leader. So, and finally, hopefully if you come away from this with nothing else, you remember one word, and that word would be impact. That's what drives these leaders above everything else, above their title, above their position, above their salary. Their impact, their ability to have an impact is what gets them up every single day, and it's their purpose. It's clear to me after talking to them, that's what drives them more than anything else. But, you know, I can tell you, having been in those roles, you can easily forget your purpose, right? You can have a project that's off the rails. You can have a budget that's out of whack. You can have a cybersecurity incident. Trust me, those were like daily exercises for me when I was the CIO at PPG. But these leaders stay focused on their purpose. They see it through day in and day out. And so what I thought I would do is share with you a personal story about purpose lost and found, just to try to help you understand how important it is to remember that. So my wife Janice and I just concluded 14 years as foster parents for newborn babies. And during those 14 years, we've had 15 babies in our house. And I like to tell people that next to raising our 2 sons, It's the most important thing that we've done as a married couple. You know, people often ask us, why do you do this? You know, what's your purpose? First and foremost, it's been my wife's calling for a long, long time to do this. Secondarily, we do it because we want to be there for those mothers who are incredibly brave to have those babies and to give them up for adoption. We've been there with them. We know how hard this is. And then last but not least, we are there for those babies because we don't want there to be any gap in their lives where there wasn't someone there who loved them. But like anything else, it's easy to forget your purpose. You know, the number one question we get asked as foster parents is, isn't it hard when you have to give the babies back? And I will tell you without hesitation, it is one of the hardest things we have to do. It's, as my wife likes to describe it, it's like a loss, right? The other thing that's really hard and easy to forget your purpose, and for those of you who are parents, you'll know what I'm talking about, it usually happens in the middle of the night after several nights without sleep and you have a baby that will not go back to bed, right? You start wondering, what was I thinking, right? But this is a story about one of those 15 babies, a little girl that we got that didn't have a name, and with the help of Patrick, we named her Claire Marie. Claire Marie just turned 12 last month. But the years go by quickly. And Claire Marie was adopted by a couple, and one day they reached out to us, and they said, you know, we have to share this story with you. She had just started school, and they went to her open house, and the teacher pulled them aside, and she said, you know, I need to tell you this. I asked all the students to paint a picture of their families. And this is the picture that Maddie, Claire Marie is now named Maddie painted of her family. Now, there's clearly a lot of people in this picture for an only child. So she said, Maddie, who are those adults in your picture? She said, oh, that's easy. She pointed out her mother and father. And then the next two people, she said, those are my birth parents. And the next two people, that's Janice and Chris. This picture, long after we're done being foster parents, will be what I will remember about what my purpose was for being a foster parent. So I ask you, as you conclude this particular session, and you go back to work, and you go back to the company that you work for, the team that you work on, and you continue to pursue your career, I ask you to think about what your purpose is and how you're going to impact your firm, the people you work with, and the profession. Thank you.